Welcome to Warrior, the Art of War for Life, a podcast for those who want to win. Leadership lessons, motivational mindsets, empowering principles, success strategies, and transformational tactics from Sunzi, the master of victory. I'm your guide on the side, David Boyd, award-winning educator, transformational speaker, and certified life coach. It's time to start winning at life.
Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm so glad you guys are here listening, and I am so excited about today's episode. I have two of my students, my Chinese students, who are both on the Falconry Club here at the United States Air Force Academy, and we're going to dive into some unique characteristics of these great birds of prey. And for those of you who tuned in last week, we talked about the precise control and power that Sunzi uses as this analogy for really getting focused into how do we pursue our objectives and our goals, that we don't have to do everything all at once, but to really be dialed in. And so we're gonna just have a great time here today, and we've got Nova here with us, and I'm gonna let my two outstanding cadets introduce themselves. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you came to the academy, and how you got into falconry.
All right. Hi guys, my name is Cadet Second Class Logan Oneil, and I'm from Apple Valley, Minnesota. And how I got into falconry was actually just the opportunity was handed to me during my cadet experience. I got to see one of the falcons flying during our football games, and the announcer was like, "That's a cadet right there flying." And so I just thought that'd be a crazy opportunity to have, and it's been a crazy opportunity to get to work with these amazing birds.
Awesome. Okay.
Perfect. I'm Cadet First Class Evan Komschlies. I'm in Cadet Squadron 9. I'm also from Minnesota, from Minnetonka, Minnesota, so right outside the Twin Cities. It's kind of funny that we both made it onto the falconry team.
And you both study Chinese?
And we both study Chinese, and we actually both, we're like the exact same. So we're both aeronautical engineering and applied math, double majors with Chinese minors, so it's like really weird.
Yes,
both
yeah.
Tall, blonde kids.
And
overachievers.
probably wouldn't have known about each other if it wasn't for the falconry team. So that's just kind of crazy too. Who would have thought?
So, Anwen, how did you get involved in Chinese first?
So I actually went to a Chinese immersion program. It was, at the time, I think the second immersion program in the country, just at the same elementary school that both my older siblings went to. They just happened to start the program the year I went into kindergarten. And so from kindergarten to third grade, I was actually solely learning Chinese. And then once we got into fourth, fifth, and then beyond, we started integrating some English until by the time I got to high school, it was like you're taking classes in Chinese, AP Chinese and other kind of classes like that. We worked with the Confucius Institute that was at the University of Minnesota. That was kind of the sponsor for the program. But then kind of ever since then, I've been into it, came here, was able to test into some of the higher level.
So, how about you? How did you get into Zhongwen? Because you had Chinese background too.
For me, I just kind of wanted something different. In my middle school, it was required that you take a foreign language, and so the two options were either Spanish or Chinese. And my brother was already pretty much fluent in Spanish, and my sister was taking it. She's a year older than me. And so I was like, I just wanted to do something different. It felt like, growing up having two older siblings is like, always being compared, and I'm like, well, this way nobody can tell me that they're better than me at Chinese. And then ended up liking the language. It was cool. Just the similarities were a lot more prevalent than I would have thought, as well as the different cultural aspects too. And so I think that's kind of what helped me to stick with it. And then now at the academy, I think it's been beneficial to get to learn a little bit more about the world and the different ways that people think. And I've even had the opportunity to live with a Singaporean captain, and he's been a really awesome, leadership, as well as that just sharing stories has been really cool too. So
yeah,
still getting a ton out of Chinese, and hopefully one day I can say I'm fluent, and having people like Evan help me practice is great too.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned how you got into falconry. How did you get into falconry?
Yeah, so right after our basic training, like right before freshman year, there's an event called Blue Rush, which I'm sure you're familiar with. All the teams and clubs come out and recruit basically the new freshmen, and I saw 2 of the 23-years who just graduated out holding a bird, and I was like, well, that's really cool. I guess I'll walk up and talk to them. I didn't really have any prior experience before coming here. I did do kind of like an environmental club almost in high school where one of my teachers was doing like a part-time internship at the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota. So we got to kind of see what that was all about, see what people do taking care of birds of prey like this. And so I kind of had a little bit of an inclination. So when I saw those 2 guys there, I was like, wow, I didn't really know that cadets do this. And so I walked up, talked to them, and then we don't really say anything to the freshmen for the first semester, just kind of let them figure out what the Air Force Academy is all about, kind of get into their groove, get their time management down. And then second semester, we have like a 1.5-month long trial process, which starts in about February and goes to recognition generally. So this year it'll be about mid-March. So you don't have to have any prior experience. Like I kind of said, I didn't have any. Logan didn't have any either. But you learn everything you need to know. And so probably 2 weeks into tryouts, I got to pick up a bird for the first time. And then I was like, yep, I love this. I want to do this here at the academy. And so the way I was able to get onto the team was being the guy that wasn't afraid to do the dirty work. At the time when I was trying out, we still used a power washer to clean up their pens and stuff, so I was always the guy going in there and coming out sopping wet with a perfectly clean pen. And they were like, well, this guy, he's not just here to pick up the birds and talk to the, important people or try to schmooze with the upperclassmen to try to get onto the team. Like, he does the dirty work. And so now I've been on the team for 2.5 years, and it's going to be sad when I have to leave in May.
Mm.
Team's
It's a really awesome opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Any plans to continue with falconry after?
It's tough. There's a pretty extensive licensing process, and it's not super easy to travel with them, and it's not quite like you can have somebody dog sit for you. You have to have another licensed falconer come and feed your birds and make sure they're okay when you're gone. So the military lifestyle isn't super conducive to falconry, but once I get out, find a more stationary job, I think it could definitely be a hobby that I could get into. It's a really amazing experience. We don't really do the traditional sport of falconry in the sense of like hunting with them. Mm-hmm. Our birds don't really associate live animals with prey, but I think kind of getting into that aspect of things and would be a super kind of relaxing and kind of tune back into nature sort of thing that I would really enjoy.
Hmm. Okay. How about you?
I think pretty similar to Evan. He's already got his pilot slot, so I'm hoping to, just make ourselves just that much more similar. Get a pilot slot afterwards too. And so as a pilot, it's not uncommon for you have to, PCS or permanent change of station every 3 years. And so it would be hard to build essentially, because most houses don't have falconry facilities called mews at them. And so you'd have to build a new mews at every house you go to, and that might not be something that I'd be able to afford. But the opportunity to work with them in some way, probably after separating or retirement, would be something that I think would be super cool, very relaxing, and teaches a lot of life lessons too. I for one have learned a ton about patience working with the falcons. They think a little bit differently than we do. They're not humans. And so for the falcon, you almost have to communicate with them in a way that they understand. Like, I can't tell Nova, like, hey, fly around the stadium and I'll give you some food when you're done. That's what ends up happening, but it takes a lot of little steps in between to get her to learn that sort of message. And so just learning that, the falcon might not get it right away, and they don't respond that well to anger. Their falcons are actually super intelligent, and so what they'll remember most is something that makes them afraid. And we don't want them to be afraid of us or the hood. And so we've had a couple of times where I might make a mistake and Nova might see something I do that's scary, and that teaches me that's a great way not to do it. And so you kind of learn a little bit more on what works and taking those little patient steps. And over time, and a lot of effort, you can really see the falcon's behavior change. And it's a super cool process that I've gotten to see as a cadet, and I think it'd be awesome to continue to see that in my further life.
That's cool. I would have never guessed that for falcons. Just the idea of patience, right? Mm-hmm. And it's something we talk about I've talked about it in my podcast a lot, waiting for the opportune moment, which, that bird imagery of just kind of watching and waiting and being ready to kind of seize that moment. But the patience side, I never really thought about that before. That's really interesting.
It's different because the way that falcons will hunt is typically super fast, faster than any other animal on the planet. Peregrine falcons have been clocked going up to 242 miles an hour.
Jeez.
And so
Fastest animal on the planet.
they
Wow.
can certainly move very fast when they need to, which is a little different from the way that they train and the way that we learn. And even the way that humans learn too. Like I have, for me, Chinese has been a difficult opportunity, but it's really been cool to, look back and see how I've improved. And it didn't happen in a day. And so learning as a human or teaching a falcon, both of them have to take little small steps every day. And I think Nova does a great job at teaching me that. Even when, I didn't think I was in class, there's still things that I can learn.
So it's really interesting. I never really thought about the logistics of how do you communicate with a falcon what you want them to do. So how does that work? Like, they're very intelligent, but they don't speak English. You don't speak Peregrine Falcon.
That'd be pretty
and they think about things completely differently. So how do you two go about communicating the mission, basically, and the objective?
So for another interesting lesson is you got to kind of know each bird specifically. Some of them respond really well to different, stimuli. For Nova, she's incredibly food motivated. And so, just like me, if you give me some food, I'll pretty much go do any favor you want. And so for Nova...
Cadets.
Yeah, sure. And so you get her to do... it starts really small tasks, and it's the same science that you can use to train yourself, train a falcon, a dog. I actually got to train a rat at the academy. And it just starts with very small operant conditioning. And so once she... Just take her from like 2 inches away. Once she steps onto the glove, I'll give her a little piece of food. And then she starts to understand, okay, every time I come to the glove, I get some food. And I like food, so I'm going to come to the glove again. And then you can take that inch, like those 2 inches, and make it 4, make it, a yard, until eventually you can actually release them. And then at our halftime shows, we'll have them fly around completely untethered, and they come back because they have that trust and training with us that they know that they're going to get a reward for doing a job well done.
Okay, that's really interesting because a couple episodes back I was talking about the concept of, in English we have this saying, how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. In Chinese it's actually, how do you feed an elephant?
Okay.
And it's the character like wei, from like in wei, because, or 我为了你做什么, right? So that idea of doing something impressive, something great, is literally how you feed an elephant. And same principle, one bite at a time, right? They're just going to keep eating and eating and eating. So breaking, that it seems like such an overwhelming task, which was something I talked about last week, was how do you overcome that sense of overwhelm, and by breaking into smaller, manageable tasks. That's really interesting.
Evan's got an extra year of experience on me, and so he's got some stories. He's worked with one bird that would never be picked up at all, and then and when he walked in the first time, I don't think she wanted to be picked up either, but they ended up building a pretty strong connection later.
Yeah, I would echo what Logan said about patience. Sometimes it's just you're standing in the pen for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, even upwards of half an hour, just letting them make the choice to come to you, which I think is a pretty important thing to learn, maybe not just dealing with animals, but with other people. It's like, okay, you might have somebody that is under you. Like right now, I'm the training officer for my squadron, and so, sometimes people won't be as receptive of some advice that you might have for them at the time, but kind of continuing to persevere through that and waiting for them you can kind of sense a change in somebody when they're like, okay, maybe they trust me more now, or they seem like they're going to be more receptive today because they've been having a good day, whether it's training or the bird stepped up quickly, and so just kind of having that kind of ability to see that change in somebody and then being able to use that effectively and kind of hope to improve them. So the bird that Logan's talking about, her name's Kara. She has some medical issues. She is a prairie falcon, but she was actually raised in a peregrine falcon nest, and so the mother of the nest like nipped her on the back of the head and potentially caused some brain damage. The bird fell out of the tree, and a falconer in the local area picked her up and kind of nursed her back up to health, and then donated her to us. She's like the only falcon in the, I want to say, the United States that's had a CT scan on her brain to kind of see what is going on, because she has some balance issues. She would like fall off perches and stuff. Falcons have a really good sense of balance, as you can see. Nova can't see right now, but she's able to, stand there without much of an issue. And so when that gets screwed up, it is pretty devastating for a bird. And so I worked with her like every day for probably a year and a half or so, just slowly, like Logan was saying, step up, give her a piece of food, and just get her used to working with people again. Wow. And so now, even when I go in there, she reacts differently to me than even Logan or other people on the team, and it is kind of a special connection. Birds don't really love humans like a dog might, so we like to say, another thing that I think I've kind of learned and what we say on the team is we like to do the loving for both sides of a relationship, right? So really putting yourself into the bird and putting kindness and care in, and then you can really see, like Logan was saying, improvement, significant improvement from the birds.
Wow. So here's a bird that has some mental limitations, some potential handicaps, and then some relational barriers. So for a year and a half, you're stepping in there, you're putting yourself in there, literally, and just kind of working on this relationship. So what are you thinking the whole time? Like, what was your goal? You're like, what did you want to happen? What did you want to change? And how did you stick to this? Like, did you ever feel like this is impossible? This is never going to happen. This bird's never going to step up on my arm. Like, what were you thinking? What was the goal? How did you sustain that year and a half of, whatever trial and difficulty? And what was it like the first day she like hops up? I want to hear about that. Yeah. So really, the thing that made me keep coming back is the small improvements. It's like, okay, this time it only took 12 minutes for her to finally start reacting well. But basically, stepping in for the first time in there, they've got big pens. The pen that she's in right now is pretty actually similar to my cadet dorm room, and I share that with another person. So they've got a pretty big enclosure to, if they want to, run away from you, right? So you're kind of walking around and waiting for them to, like, they show some body language to where it's like, okay, it looks like now I can kind of tell that she's ready to get picked up, basically. And so, yeah, the first time she'll step up, and then maybe she'll fly away when I start to try to put the hood on or something like that. But it's small improvements like that. My goal was to make it so I don't want to say fix her, but make it so after I leave, she can still be a falcon that the Air Force Academy can use to bring out to football games. She can still come out to games and be a good ambassador. She's actually one of the sweetest birds that we have. She is one of the birds that I would say actually enjoys being pet. Most of our birds tolerate it, especially the ones that we fly. Like the bird that I fly, AC, is slightly more aggressive, and so doesn't really enjoy being pet, especially on game days. It's like, okay, I'm really just ready to fly and do my thing here and have a show, but she's definitely one of the sweeter birds. And so I was like, man, it stinks that that's almost being wasted when she's, people are afraid to go pick her up, or like, oh man, I know I won't be able to pick her up. And so, yeah, that perseverance of like, I want this to be something that I can improve and kind of leave an impact on the team. Yeah. So not only are you thinking about how to kind of help this bird, but you're also thinking about how to be able to pay it forward and pass this on, so that when you're gone, the next generation of falconers can continue to develop that relationship.
Exactly.
Huh. Okay, so actually yesterday's episode, we talked about the aggregation of marginal gains, those little 1% improvements in areas. And so when you started seeing those things, what was that like?
Yeah, it's weird because sometimes it's like a little 2-step forward, 1 step back sort of thing. So it's like, man, it's a good day today. And then the next day, she's bad. And it's almost like you got to step out of the room, recompose yourself. Like, okay, I know she can do this, whatever. I just have to be patient. And yeah, just small steps like that until pretty soon. I mean, I was even having her fly from the bucket in the middle of her room up to my glove, which was a significant improvement, because at first I thought she was never going to be able to fly. Like, with the balance issues, you'd think if she's trying to fly, she doesn't know which way's up and kind of go hit the ground or something like that. But, you know, like Logan was saying, step a foot up to my hand, and then 2 feet, and then pretty soon she's doing it 20 times up. I mean, I'm a pretty tall guy, I'm 6'2". Yeah. Going up to whatever that is, 8 feet from the ground is...
Wow.
It's a pretty amazing.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's astounding. So you get to see that improvement, and what was it like the first time she flew from the ground up to your reach up there? What was that for you?
Pretty surprising. I mean, it was just like you go in there, and then one day it happens. You know, I don't know. It's pretty fulfilling too, of knowing that you're able to help the bird to improve and kind of get back to maybe what they're naturally supposed to do. Getting back into shape, building up those flying muscles. Yeah, it's pretty special walking in there, and pretty gratifying when she walks in and makes different, like, chirping noises at me rather than, you know, Logan, other people on the team, even the master falconer that works with us, who's been doing falconry for 50 plus years and been working with the team since the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool to know that maybe she has more trust in me and a better, kind of closer connection.
Yeah, you got a connection. Yeah. That's amazing. That's so cool. Huh. Okay, so patience. Which is interesting. A few months back I had Chris Satterwhite, who's operator.
Okay.
And he came in and talked about tactical patience and the importance of tactical patience. And so, yeah, it just reminded me of my interview with him. That's really interesting. So tell us about Nova, and, you know.
I think she'd like to say she loves your little decoration on your shirt right there. You got a nice little.
Yes.
I think she likes that.
It's like I've been coined, only.
Yeah, by a bird, I guess. So Nova's our school's official mascot. We've had her since 2020. She was actually kind of named after the Space Force, which was created in 2019. So the year after, cadets could actually commission straight into the Space Force. To commemorate that, we got to paint a nice little hood that matches the Space Force football team uniform. So that explains our hood right there. But she's really amazing as a mascot. Very, like I said, motivated after food, and I think she embodies a lot of the attributes that the Air Force is hoping to train us as cadets. That being, you know, speed, courage, powerful flight are the three that are often mentioned, but the tenacity just to be able to go get after something you want, and she's given me that in spades for sure. But similar to Evan, it's been really cool. When I first started training her, she was almost a little bit afraid of the hood. It was pretty common among gyrfalcons. So she's a gyrfalcon, largest species of falcon in the world, and they're pretty well known for not really wanting to get the hood on, almost because she kind of views herself as like a human, or views us as birds, however you want to put it. And so because of that, she's like, well, you guys don't have hoods on. Why do I don't have to have a hood on?
That's an interesting line of thinking.
And so, you know, there's kind of a couple ways where you could think about it. It's like, one, I could try to, you know, dominate and just like make her do it, make her succumb to my will. But with falcons, a lot better way to train them is through positive reinforcement as opposed to negative. And so just reinforcing her like, hey, you know, I know this hood in the past has probably been a little scary to you. Maybe it was in, you know, a context where it did get forced on you, but we can kind of revert that. And just over time, been doing a lot of her getting comfortable getting the hood on and off. And so when I first started working with her, she had a, you know, super strong bird. I mean, you can feel her chest muscles. She's able to, in the wild, gyrfalcons will fly up to 90 miles an hour in level flight. And so they've got, that's another pretty crazy feat. So peregrines are the fastest in a stoop, but gyrfalcons like Nova are the fastest consistently. And so she had a ton of awesome traits, and it was like, she's got these personality traits, and how can I sort of leverage her personality to work together? And so just understanding what motivated her, which was really food, using that to make it to where now she's actually got to do some shorter flying performances at got to do one at an elementary school pretty recently for some kids when we went to Annapolis. Got to do one for the superintendent at his house, and so different flights. So really another way to kind of leverage our birds more than just the stadium flights. And she's been an amazing mascot. I guess to mention more about the Gyrs is they're one of the rarest species of falcons in the world, as well as the most expensive. I saw on the news recently that a bird that looks just like Nova sold for $465,000. So,
it's like more than my house.
Yeah, just more than the entire USAFA education is worth, and it's kind of crazy. But having the opportunity to work with her and the heritage that Gyr falcons represent is a large part on why they're so valuable. When falconry was really popular in Europe during the Renaissance, if you wanted to get a falcon, you had to have enough money to send out a voyage to the Arctic regions where they're found, which is why they're got almost the snow colored to help them blend in. You have to have skilled enough explorers to be able to find them, and then they have to be lucky enough to be able to bring them back and survive the weather. And so because of that, there's stories of Gyr falcons being traded as ransom for princes and things of that nature. And so I think the history, as well as just the rarity, are two of the reasons why Nova makes such a great mascot. Way better than the goats or the donkeys at West Point or Annapolis.
Gotta throw that in.
Of course.
They don't perform quite as well as our
Yes.
do.
No,
Not
you
even
probably
close.
don't want to see a donkey flying over the stadium.
I'd have some questions.
Interesting. So you both mentioned this idea of you got to put yourself out there, and you got to be really patient, and you can't force them. So a lot of positive reinforcement, and this idea of conditioning. So both of the birds that you worked with have had some conditioning challenges, and one of the things that I like about this, as you know, I'm a big mindset person, and I believe there's always a way to move forward.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter kind of what's been done in the past. We can change. We don't have to do what we've always done. And so what would you say you've learned about kind of this process of reconditioning, of changing a set of beliefs? And how has working with falcons helped you guys in that regard? Like, has it changed the way you think about yourself and about other people? Working with these birds and realizing, hey, you couldn't do this before, but you can do this now, and it's just a process. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, one aspect of that to me is also communication as you're trying to make those changes. If I'm not down there at practice one day and Logan goes in there, I want him to know exactly the things that I do and kind of what the things are to look out for. And so I think that's something that I've really improved on, is like kind of communicating any sort of changes that I want to be made, and kind of if I'm doing it just by myself, she might just revert back to herself after I leave, right? So kind of communicating that and trying to make that change not just my own change, but trying to help other people improve as well. And Logan does the same thing with me. He does a lot of work with Nova, and so if I'm going in there on a weekend, I'll text Logan and be like, hey man, give me the very specifics, like as I walk in, what should she be doing, what's she doing with her wings, what she where's she looking, where is she sitting in her pen, and then how quickly should she be coming to my glove, how much food should I give her so it's like very specific things to try to communicate and make that an open kind of feedback to where I'm not screwing those changes that he wants to make up. It's kind of a big aspect for me.
Yeah.
She's just getting more
She's
comfortable.
got-
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good sign when the falcons are. It's called rousing. That just means they're comfortable, kind of like how we would stretch, And so I wouldn't be surprised if pretty soon she actually falls asleep. Falcons in the wild will sleep roughly 14 hours a day, and so them having the hood on, I've taken her to class, and her and I are kind of dozing off together. Not in Chinese, never in Chinese.
No.
But yeah, to kind of continue what Evan was saying, the power of teamwork. It would be really hard to try to get any of these falcons to change the behavior on their own. One of the things that I really like about the team is it's actually older than the campus of USAFA itself. It's been around since 1955, when the Air Force Academy was still under construction and the cadets were all at Lowry Air Force Base. And so the tradition's been handed down, but also the knowledge on how to work with the certain birds and what works, what doesn't, how does this bird respond to this, how does that bird do this. And so knowing, because I wasn't here when Nova was born. She was hatched as an egg, but a year before I got here. And so learning from the person who trained her previously, like, hey, I tried this, it didn't work. I'm going off to pilot training right now, but you can probably go and help figure out, and like Evan said, hopefully leave that legacy where it's a little bit easier. And I think the second thing that is really important for changing, like when something seems daunting, is the power of habits. Falcons, Nova at least, and a couple other ones I've worked with, they really like a routine. And so when you come in at the same time, you give them the same food and you do the same type of training. And so like the birds that we fly, like I know Ace, the one that Evan flies, he knows when it's go time. Like he'll start flapping his wings.
He starts flying before the hood is even off.
Yeah,
if you let him go. So he
gets
really
excited. And a lot of that is through the power of the habits that he has, that he knows, it's flying time. And that's what we want him to do. We want to be ready to go and fly, and he does a great job. It was cool to get to watch Evan fly during one of the football games. And so just having the habits and something that they can get accustomed to, and then they kind of learn, this is what's normal, if that makes sense.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I talked about this great book by James Clear, Atomic Habits, and what a great read. Just the power that's there. And so I wanted to go back to one thing you mentioned earlier, which was leveraging their strengths. Right? This is a key tenet of Sunzi's philosophy, is you exploit others' weaknesses, you play to your strengths. And so how do you determine that when you're working with those birds? And then have you ever stepped back and said, you know what, I've got some strengths too. How do I leverage my own strengths? Like you're in a high stress, high stakes pressure cooker here at the academy. There's not enough time. There's too much to do. There's a lot of things that maybe don't make sense. You got to learn how to play the game. So how do you, in that culture of you got to conform at a certain level, how do you still play to your strengths? How have you managed that during your careers here? And what have you learned about that from the birds? And I'll let you both answer.
Sure. I mean, one aspect for me, which isn't quite exactly what you asked, but in terms of playing to my strengths of helping people when I know that I can help them. But on the flip side of that, one of the biggest things that I've learned here at the academy is asking for help. I kind of started out my freshman year thinking I could do it all. In high school I did pretty well, obviously, to get here. But like you said, it's pretty tough. A lot of time is taken up by, military aspects of cadet life. And so I know that if somebody like Logan asked me for help, like, hey man, I'm having a really hard time, writing my Chinese paper or something like that. It's like, okay, I know that I can help him because that's one of my strengths. I've been doing it for, 17 years since I was 5.
Kid of account, he's done it so long.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, Logan can help me. He's, like I said, he's a math major too, so hey, I'm having a hard time writing this MATLAB script, the computer programming script. Can you help me with this? And so learning that, kind of recognizing where your weakness is or where you need to improve, and kind of trusting yourself and the people that you're talking to enough to ask for that help is a really powerful lesson that I've learned here.
So not just leveraging your strengths, but learning to leverage other people's strengths to help you in maybe some areas where you're not there. Interesting. That's a great insight. And yeah, I mean, we can't do it alone. I just definitely can't make it. All right, how about you, Lung?
I apologize, the bird pun, but for me, I think it's you can't pigeonhole yourself into anywhere. Into any type of strength, and to recognize that you're essentially a new person every day, and being able to say, today I did really great at math, or today I did really great working with the birds, and to recognize that some days aren't your best, and so being willing to adapt to failure, I think, is in a way you could see that as a strength, and just being able to change, recognize when things aren't working, because there's been a couple of times, whether it's Aero or Chinese, where I'm doing something consistently, but I'm not really seeing results, and so there comes a point where you have to ask, I have to be patient, but also, is this the best, most efficient way that I can do this? And so I think not feeling like you have to do things one way all the time just because that's how it's always been done, I think being able to maybe have a little curiosity and see what's the best way that I can do this, and open yourself up to a new way of thinking.
Yeah, that's really cool. Last week, I talked about this concept in The Art of War. Sunzi says that victory is the interplay between best practices and innovation. Standard tactics, special tactics. And that's how you get there, right? Because if you keep doing the same thing but you're not getting the results you want, it's time to mix things up. It's time to do something different. Otherwise, you're just going to keep perpetuating, right? And at the same time, you don't have to fix something that's not broken. But yeah, curiosity. I love that. It's really, really important. So let's talk about the birds some more. Sunzi uses birds of prey specifically for their speed, for their power that is focused into a single strike, right? Sunzi mentions that the strike of a bird of prey can break bones. And, so tell me about that. Like, why, like, Sunzi, of course, 2,500 years ago, way closer to nature, way closer to falcons. They're using falcons in ways that, maybe we're definitely not today. And just a greater awareness. So what was he seeing in these birds of prey that can teach us something about how do we focus and concentrate all of our energy and effort into what we're looking for and what we're going after?
Sure. So before I get to my answer, kind of preface it a little bit. One of my favorite parts of the falconry team is like the cool experiences that we get to have. So one of those things is going to Utah. There's a falconry competition there called Sky Trials, and so a bunch of falconers kind of drive out into the middle of this valley where there's no cell service. Last year there was snow on the ground. It was like 5 degrees, and you're sitting in a camp chair just like freezing cold. And this falconer goes out to the middle of the field, releases the bird, and they fly up to altitude. So these birds are going up to 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet. Wow. And then they're waiting on, is what the term is called. They're just sitting up there waiting for the falconer to call them down. And so once the bird or the falconer is ready, they will release a homing pigeon. And then the falconer will kind of call the bird down, and they'll come down, shooting down at high speed. And like you said, sometimes they'll hit that bird, puff feathers, definitely breaking bones, and then come down and finish their prey. And so I think, obviously we don't do that here at the Academy, but it's cool to see kind of that traditional aspect of falconry. But at the same time, I don't want to steal Logan's thunder, but that maybe happens 10% of the time, 20% of the time. And so, yeah, they're the fastest animal on the planet. They're the best at what they do, but they still fail, right? And so that you can be super concentrated, have all like totally locked in, and sometimes it's not enough. But going up again, they'll get a second opportunity, and kind of persevering through that. And I think that's kind of one of the important lessons there, as far as, yeah, they're the best at what they do. They're the fastest animal on the planet, but they still, sometimes have to try again.
Yeah. Okay. So Logan, you had mentioned this to me before. So what is the success rate? I mean, traditionally, how often will these birds of prey succeed in their hunts? They've got speed, they've got power, they've got insane vision. I mean, 1,000, 1,500 feet up, like, you want me to spot a pigeon? I'm like, no, an ant, Yeah. So how, with all that going for them, what is their success rate like?
So it's kind of dependent on the source that you find, but yeah, most research that I've found is typically between like 10 and 30%. And it's just crazy, because a lot of that preparation too is like you literally don't even see the bird because they're so high. In the wild, they'll be, I think, even up to like almost a mile above the ground. Wow. And just clocking in, and so all that preparation sometimes, doesn't end up being fruitful, but every time they are successful, it's because they have done all that preparation before. And roughly, about 25%, 24 maybe for Evan.
That's right. Class pride.
Class of 24!
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So 10 to 30% of the time they get a kill. But the other 70, 80, 90% of the time, they come up with empty talons.
Yeah, and for falcons in the wild, you don't don't really have time to like dwell on it. You gotta get up there again. There's no guarantee.
Go back up.
You know, Nova's kind of spoiled. We give her food every day, but if she were in the wild, she'd have to every day find that new source of food. And
Yeah, she's got to hunt.
You got to
survive.
hunt to survive. Really, it's you know, just the food chain. And so Nova will actually hunt a little differently, and they'll do what's like chase. They'll actually chase after even geese. I've seen deer falcons hunt geese.
Wow.
And so the different types.
Geese are mean.
Yeah.
That
Stay in
there's-
packs too. It's like
yeah.
one falcon against 30 geese. How's this gonna go?
Oh, wow.
The falcon typically gets one geese really well, but then his 29 other buddies show up, and it's like, well, I gotta go. But so just, I don't know, to keep doing it, even when you fail, is certainly a thing that falcons have to do in the wild, and I think something that, as a cadet, you know, there's been times I prepare for a GR, stay up late studying, do all the techniques and things that I have done and have been effective before, and I get back and there's not the grade I want on it, and still got to keep doing it. Can't, you know, if there's something that you want for the Falcons, it's food, and you know, for me and Evan, it's, you know, hopefully to get the commission to graduate. Got to learn from the setback and keep going.
So, I mean, and falcons are a little different than us, right? Short-term memory. What have you learned about moving on from failure from the falcons? How has that changed your mindset? Like, you know, at the academy, you don't have time to dwell on setbacks, right? Because there's always something else. Yeah. So how's that worked out for you?
I think it's just learning to look forward to the next thing. You know, there's always something on the horizon that's you can look forward to, right? So, yeah, maybe next week I have a 3,000 word philosophy paper that I have to do before I leave for Thanksgiving break. But I can kind of use that Thanksgiving break.
Oddly specific.
Hypothetically. But I can use kind of that almost reward for the Falcons food. But yeah, going back home, seeing my family, getting to enjoy Thanksgiving with them as, okay, I can do this. I can totally focus in like the Falcons do, like when they're flying around the stadium. It's like, man, how do you guys make sure they don't fly away? And it's like, yeah, it might seem like they're just flying around the stadium, but I mean, they're looking over their shoulder. They're really just looking at that senior in the middle of the field spinning the lure, which is basically a beanbag on a rope. But they're really just laser focused on that. And so, yeah, then they get their food and then they can go relax in their pen for the rest of the day, sort of thing, right? So kind of learning that, okay, there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. Okay, the bird maybe didn't fly great at the stadium, but they still, you know, the day after that, as we're preparing to fly at the football game this Saturday, I mean, yesterday the bird that's going to be flying on Saturday didn't catch the lure, right? But today, I'm sure hopefully she will, and tomorrow, I'm sure hopefully she will, and, you know, just kind of having that short-term memory, but also knowing that there's a reward there after, and kind of persevering through any sort of work that you have to do, and
Okay.
working through that failure.
So short-term memory for past failures, but long-term perspective on future focus and good things that are coming. Interesting. That's pretty cool. So you mentioned how the birds never lose sight of the lure. Even as they're circling around the stadium, they never lose sight of their goal or their objective. With all the cacophony of stadium and crazy fans and food trucks and smells and sights and noise, that's really impressive. You know,
Definitely.
I mean, like for me, I'd be like, oh, what? You know,
Yeah.
It's like it's like I walk out to my garage to get a tool, and 2 hours later I walk back in the house distracted by something, and I'm like, I forgot why I went out there in the first place. You know, I'm like, oh no.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
So concentration, focus. That's one of the aspects that Sunzi admired about these birds in using them as a metaphor. So that's super cool. I don't think I ever realized that. Yeah, they don't ever lose sight.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, that laser focus is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about their speed. Let's talk about their wings. Let's talk about how they fly. How do they control? I mean, at that speed, you're talking speeds of 200 miles an hour on a power dive. Like,
Yes, sir.
how do they do that? It's crazy.
I think it's pretty cool. Like, talking about the actual aerodynamics of it, because Evan and I are both aero majors.
Yeah, I got the right people in here, right? Tell me everything. Like everything. This is why the F-22 works, right? This is why the F-35 works.
Right. Yeah.
And so I guess my favorite, I'll steal the coolest one. I think is actually their noses. And so if you look, I don't know if the camera can see, there's a little bone in their nose, and that's what's called a nose cone.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you start to go faster and faster, air actually starts to act differently. And so if you ever try to like breathe really high compressed air, it's hard on your lungs and you can't exhale it and actually breathe effectively.
It's like trying to breathe when you put your head out the car door.
Right.
It's like I can't figure this.
It's coming too fast. Yeah.
And so Falcons going 250 miles an hour have that same sort of problem. You have to figure out a way, how do I slow the air down before I can breathe it? And so that nose cone right there, it actually, when the air comes in, it causes it to spiral almost like a screw, slowing it down so that they can breathe and respirate properly. And so Air Force engineers are having the same problem with hypersonics, and even the SR-71 Blackbird. You have a plane going Mach 3.5, I mean, that hitting a compressor blade fan, it's going to break the engine. So you have to figure out before you combust the air, you have to actually slow it out to speed it up even faster. And so similar design, the SR-71 on the front of the engines has this big black cone that can actually move back and forth that allows it to slow down the air so that when it gets to the compressor blades, it's not supersonic, and so it can then shoot it out even faster. And that same technology that we've learned from Falcons is then even still being applied today with, weapons and certain planes that can go above speeds of even Mach 6. And so just one of the really cool ways that they're breathing is even how we can apply engineering and make our planes even faster. Just, I'm sure Sunzi would have been surprised about that too.
Yeah, they didn't have an Air Force back in the day, but he was all about air superiority.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He talks about striking fast from up on high and then just disappearing. And I think, man, he would have loved.
He would have
loved some of these things. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that was one thing.
Yeah, so kind of one of the research paper, like I tend to get, like Logan was saying, a little nerdy into the aerodynamics of how they fly, but with the biology in their eyesight's like 10 times better than ours. We like to say they could, if they knew how to read, could read a newspaper across a football field.
Wow.
So, I don't know about you, but 20 feet away, I'm probably not reading a newspaper.
Even with my contacts.
Right. But the interesting thing is they're the most precise kind of direction of their focus is like 20 degrees out. Like for us, we can look straight forward, and that's kind of where you're most precise. But their eyes, they don't move in their eye sockets, and the most precise part of their vision is like 20 degrees, I believe it is, outwards. And so when they're flying down, they actually fly in a spiral. So that they don't have to turn, because if they have to turn their head to look at something straight in front of them, that's going to be more drag on their head, and so they'll spiral down to keep their head in the same position, so as their eye is kind of spiraling around, so they're always in the same position, and that's how they can get to those super high speeds, is they're not really moving around their head and increasing drag when they are diving down at their prey. So it's kind of a cool thing, not really something that we mimic because we don't really have that problem with military aircraft, because you can look anywhere with all the crazy stuff that they have with cameras and things now, but it's a really interesting way of how they've adapted to, fly as fast as they possibly can.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's kind of windy here in Colorado, and I go outside and all of a sudden it's like I can feel my contacts drying up, right? Get ready to pop off my eye. I'm like, eye drops.
Yeah.
And I'm not going anywhere near that fast.
Right.
Well, it's kind of interesting you mention that, because one of the cool parts about their eyes is they have almost like a second eyelid called a nictitating membrane. And it's almost like a windshield wiper, but for their eyes. And so as the air's going in, it's like a clear eyelid, and so they can still see with the nictitating membrane and kind of like clear up their eyelids. And so just sort of funny you mentioned that with the eye drops. That's one of the ways they can moisturize their eyes when going, super fast.
Wow. That's crazy. Now, you mentioned earlier, I think before we were on air, that their eyes are much larger than ours comparatively, and that allows them to see a lot better than we can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you scaled up their head to the size of our head, their eyeballs would be the size of an orange. So if you can imagine that, 2 giant eyeballs sitting on your head, that's part of the reason they're able to see so well.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, still, just the thought that they can see so well from so far away.
And even able to see colors of light that we can't, so they can see into the ultraviolet spectrum. And so that allows them, there's certain, just like how we have a infrared signature, there's some ultraviolet signatures that get left behind by certain types of prey that they can then track that ultraviolet light and find the animals that way too.
Dang. I don't know if Sunzi knew about that, but that's really, really cool. So you were telling me about their wings earlier and how that kind of inspired some of our modern designs. Tell me a little bit more about that, because Sunzi is all about this precision control, and how much did the wings play into that?
So a lot of their control and kind of like aerodynamics, being able to change directions fast, is based on they have essentially like a variable wing design. Planes, when they fly, you typically want them to be stable. When you hit a bump, you don't want to
wings stay in the same place.
Right. You don't want to be, if you're flying on your 747 and you hit a little turbulence, you don't want your plane to be going crazy. You want it to be static when hit with a perturbance. And so Falcons can fly in a stable configuration, typically with their wings out. But when they're really maneuverable is actually when they're unstable. And so in most aircraft design, you kind of have that trade-off between stable and maneuverability. And so a lot of the high-performance fighter jets that the Air Force has, like F-16 and the F-22, are actually not stable, and they use computers to help them fly level. And then for the Falcons, what really allows them to have quick turn rates is actually their tail. I know Evan has done research on that, so he can definitely tell you more than I can.
Yeah, so one of the research projects that's going on in the Aero Lab right now is basically the idea of an F-16, which has a vertical tail and 2 horizontal stabilizers. And the idea is, instead of having that configuration, you lop that tail section off and you replace it with a rotating empennage. But basically, you have 2 horizontal tails that can rotate. And so when birds are flying, they're able to, especially like Logan was saying, when they're maneuvering like that, they're turning quickly, or the prey makes a sudden move, they're able to quickly adapt, and they use their tail to kind of stabilize themselves. And so the idea there is, can we try to mimic that tail rotation to get similar maneuverability characteristics to maybe an F-16, and then have some drag reduction in there as well, reducing the electromagnetic signature of the aircraft potentially. But it's pretty amazing how many different, like, you call it biomimicry, of we take things from these birds and try to adapt our stationary wings to mimic them. There's really cool pictures of, I don't know if you've seen a B-2, the one that kind of looks like an alien spaceship. But the kind of side profile of it looks exactly like a peregrine falcon in a dive, where it's kind of got the swept back wings. They kind of fly in like almost a teardrop as they're diving in. And so there's a lot of shaping that we do based off of these guys, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. Huh. One of the things that Sunzi loves about Falcons he uses is, not just the speed, but the stealth. Mm-hmm. Right. So he talks about stealth, and stealth is so important. You get in, you get out, and you can't defend against somebody where you don't know where they are. And so he's a big stealth type guy. He would probably love a lot of this stuff, the applications of these principles. Wow, that's. I don't know, I've learned so much today. This is so cool. So, what would the two of you say would be the biggest thing that you've learned? I get more presents. I'm gonna keep those. I'm gonna keep them. Give them to my kids.
Yeah, they'd love that.
Yeah, Falconry badge.
Oh yeah.
But what would you say are like the biggest things that you've learned from working with these birds? And what would you say to someone who's going to come up and say, "This is the 21st century. Birds are expensive. It's a big cost. There's other things you should be doing." Like, what would you say to the detractors? They're kind of obsolete. And how would you respond to that? Like, how has it changed you, and how is that going to change you as a very soon-to-be future leader of the Air Force, and not too far behind? What would you say to some of those detractors, and what has been that biggest takeaway in terms of working with these birds?
I think for myself, kind of talking more on like how you can apply the things that you learn outside of falconry, right? So like we've talked about, perseverance is a big thing. Putting in care, that's one big thing that I've learned is, we have the enhanced character development time. Mm-hmm. So today we were talking about social currency and the idea of using your influence for positive impact on other people. And so I think just like kind of learning to lead with your heart, and the assignments you have can wait. I know you're walking through the hallway and all you're thinking about is, oh man, I got to go back and spend the next 4 hours trying to do this thing that I don't want to do. But you can still take the time to, try to have a positive impact on somebody's life. Maybe there's a freshman walking down the hall that just got yelled at on the terrazzo for not running fast enough, or whatever it might be.
Right.
And so if you can just take that time and be like, okay, I know today's a bad day for me, but I can still, I have a bad day, come down to practice, and I'll still have the patience to work with the birds. Maybe that's not gonna do something super phenomenal. They're obsolete birds, whatever that argument might be, but you can take that lesson that you've learned there and, try to put, like I said, lead with your heart and not just try to have blinders on. Like we're all here together. It's not we graduate as a class, not as a bunch of 900 individuals. And so I think that's one big aspect that I would say is something that can be learned from these birds.
Logan?
I think pretty much to echo what Evan said. You really got to get to know who you're working with. When we do our tryouts, there's sort of three big things that we say. One's how well you work with the public. We do a lot of getting to say hi to fans and show people the birds at the football stadium. The other one's, how well you work with the birds, and how well you work with the people is the last one. And so really, like 2/3 of the tryout is essentially getting to know the people on the team and the people that train the birds on an individual level. Because, it's possible to be a leader without knowing anyone, but if you really want to be effective, and then you have to get to know each falcon you're working with, or each person you're working with pretty personally. And not only does it make it a lot more effective, it also makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Being the falconry team, it's only 12 people at the moment, and so it's really, I feel like everyone's almost kind of like an extended family, if you will. And so taking the individuality aspect and recognize that everyone has their own concerns, and like Evan said, sometimes, I might be having a bad day, and Evan can recognize that, and he might be having a bad day, or maybe even just got a really nice haircut, and whatever happens, just having that, interconnectedness, I think helps foster team growth. And when you have a good team, I think that the mission success comes easily after that.
Which, kind of brings it back around to arguably the most well-known passage from The Art of War, which is know yourself and know others, right? And, Sunzi doesn't say know yourself and know the enemy. He says know yourself and know just everybody around you. Mm-hmm. And, that's so important for team culture, for squad life, for a graduating class. And it's interesting that by working with a bird of prey, you get to know yourself a little bit better, and you get to know those around you, people a little bit better.
I think I didn't answer the second part of your question to people who say they're obsolete. I would totally argue against that. One, for the fact of biomimicry that we talked about before, the ways historically a lot of new designs and technology come when you mix fields together, whether it be biology and engineering, or it could be behavioral science and even political science, something of that nature. When you mix them together, that's when really new groundbreaking discoveries happen. So working with, they're essentially a combination of all of it. They're biology, they're behavior science, they're aviation, they're a mix of that. And so you can really see that in falcons. And then the second reason why is they are even used to help deter threats today. Maybe not necessarily falcons, but at certain airfields, one big issue that planes can run into is bird strikes. A USAFA graduate, Sully Sullenberger, had a bird strike as a commercial pilot, and that essentially forced him to land in the Hudson because birds got into the engine. And so having falcons near the airfield helps prevent that likelihood of occurring, almost like a scarecrow. And then another big, recent emerging technology that could be applied to warfare is drones, like small personal drones that you can buy for $400 online. there's a lot of videos where people train eagles or larger birds of prey to go and take down the drones. And so having, the access to the Falcons almost gives us a whole nother like tool set to hopefully, solve the problems not of today but of tomorrow that we don't know are going to happen.
That's like the ultimate retro tech, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can't hack a Falcon.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Wow. So you mentioned kind of cross-fertilization of fields, and in last week's episode, I was talking about innovation. How do you come up with winning innovation? And 3 approaches to innovation that I pulled out of the Art of War are kind of recombining things that we already have in new ways, reconfiguring things, which would be, kind of redeploying them in from one field and taking best practices into another field, and then recreating something, right? And I mean, yeah, it totally makes sense that you can learn so many of these things when you take something out of one field that you're really good at, and you find someone else in another field, and they're like, you kind of get together, and all of a sudden it gets really exciting, and a lot of creativity can come out of that. It's very, very fruitful. It's one of the things that I do a lot in my mentoring that I mentioned last week in my podcast, is especially like when I'm working with ICs, right? Or even like you guys, like, something that you find something that they're really, really good at and they know what they're doing. And then you move into an area where maybe they're struggling, and you say, okay, how can we apply what you're good at over here into what you're struggling with over here? And all of a sudden, confidence goes through the roof. Like, oh, I know how to do that over here. And it's like, yeah, what can I apply over here that I'm doing really well with over here where I'm struggling? And then it's also almost like a challenge, right? Like, oh, I'm going to figure this out now, right? And it's just that mindset shift. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always thought about it as like big picture, mixing fields together, but I would meant like in terms of personal well-being, I've never thought of it as mixing fields almost within yourself. So I think that is pretty interesting too.
Because we tend to compartmentalize, and we might feel really confident in some areas, less confident in others, right? You get me in a Chinese classroom and I feel pretty good, right? But you get me in some other areas and maybe I'm like, I don't know, not so much. So, Well, thank you so much. This has been so cool. So, I really appreciate you both being here, and I always like to end with this question, which is, if you had 2 minutes to tell the whole world out there something that's made a difference in your life, or something that you wish you would have known earlier in life, or something that could make a difference, what would it be? And I'll give you both a chance to kind of share that. And what's made a difference in your academy experience, either with birds or without, and what would it be? Like, you get the whole world on the other side of that. No pressure.
I guess for me, and this is somewhat of a religious minded thing as well, but I really like to look at the falcons and see birds in the wild, and how they're not worried about their GR grades. They're not trying to get wealth accumulation. They are living in the moment. They're not worried. And so if falcons, fastest animals in the world, are not worried about life and still are able to make it through it, then why should I?
So just be present. Present in the moment.
Don't worry. I've never heard of anybody gaining a single hour of their life by being anxious. So it's really not a lot of value. I know as a cadet, it's very difficult, a lot of stressors, but to recognize that it comes and goes in waves, and I've made it through the waves in the past, so one more is a challenge that I can endure.
Yeah. So a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of fear, whatever it is, like maybe it doesn't help that much, that worry, but how much does it rob us of opportunities, right? We can get kind of that analysis paralysis. We can get, just petrified of what might happen, and then we end up missing out on who knows what. Like, that was totally me. I was so risk averse when I was your age that I never wanted to put myself in a position where I might look stupid, or I might be, I might fail, or I might be rejected. And now as I look back on that, I think, man, I deprived myself of so many opportunities. Not just me, but I deprived everybody else around me who, I could have had really cool experiences with some of those people. We could have had friendships, who knows what because I was so afraid. So that's a really good point. I like that one. I'm glad you brought that one up. Evan, how about you?
I think, it's kind of a summarizing some of the stuff we've already talked about, but I think the biggest thing for me that I've learned training the birds, like I said, is putting in care and kindness. Leading with their heart is something I try to live by. And when you do that with people, you try to, give them your best. Yeah, you have homework, but really the thing that matters is the people around you. When you graduate, you don't think about, oh man, I remember that time when I totally aced that math project. No. You think about the time when you were on the 8-hour car trip with Logan in the car and you were all singing Disney songs, to pass the time. So it's
hypothetically
making those connections with people as much as you want to try to, like Logan said, the wealth accumulation and try to, build yourself up. But it really is kind of having that human connection, and that's something that I've learned a lot here. And then that gives you, when you foster that with other people, it makes a safe space for you to fail, right? We talked about the Falcons failing 80% of the time. Hopefully, maybe I can lower that a little bit so I'm not failing quite as much. But it gives you that safe space to fail, and people understand, like, hey, he's trying, he gives me his best, so I'm going to kind of have that grace when, hey, he screwed up, but I know for the most part he's looking out for me. And so it gives you that area to where you can, fail and then improve. Another one of the big things that I've learned is, yeah, you might fail, but then you'll try that much harder the next time. And so as you fail and try again, you're trying. At a certain point, you have a baseline. You fail, maybe you're below that baseline, but then you try harder, and then you keep raising that baseline. So then when you're kind of at your normal everyday life, you've kind of improved yourself. And so that's kind of some of the things that I've learned that I find have really shaped the way that I am and hopefully will continue to be.
That's fantastic. I've shared this story often about, the famous Thomas Edison story, right? He has failed 1,000 times to create the light bulb that we now all take for granted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And reporters asked him about it once, saying, how do you feel about failing 1,000 times? He said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. Just the invention of the light bulb had 1,000 steps. I found 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, he only needed to find one way to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. And it changed the world, all right? And so it's the same way with us. When I learned to kind of shift my perspective from failure as evidence of worthlessness and proof that I was doomed, right, to using it as fertilizer or fuel for future growth, Jayo, that really did change a lot of things for me. So that's something that I appreciate. So yeah, man, awesome. Thank you guys so much. I'm so excited. I learned so much. I can't wait till this gets out there. I know a lot of people are going to be curious about the birds, about falconry, and some of these lessons that you've shared about them. Just really interesting. And I always end my episode just by reminding everybody that the power to win resides within, and there's always a way. There's always a way forward. And so thank you.
Thank you so much for letting us come on here.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a blast.
Fantastic.
Shake her right there.
There we go. Yeah. Ni hao Jila. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody. If you found this podcast impactful, please like and subscribe, and join us for new episodes every Warrior Wednesday. For more information, tools, and resources to help you in your daily battles, for questions or to work with me, shoot me an email at artofwarforlife@gmail.com. Most important, always remember the power to win resides within. There is always a way.